I want you all to know that this is a Sunday you can get away with taking a nap during my sermon. I'm not sure I ever noticed this before, but today I did, or this week I did, that Psalm 92 is entitled A Song for Sabbath, or in other translations, a song for the day of Sabbath, or Sabbath, the day of rest. So while you are taking Sabbath, you're supposed to read, sing, and pray this song. Now, after I started this sermon, halfway through the week, I was reading old New Yorkers and ran across one that was talking about the word burnout. And is there a pandemic of burnout? Turns out this word burnout was originally used to describe what happened to people who were burned out from too much drug use. That was the original use. And slowly it migrated to be a term that was used for those who were exhausted from too much work or too many burdens in their lives, just too much busyness. Rest nowadays is needed to counter the overwhelming social demands of our society on our human frame, on our psyche, and on our soul. Traditionally, however, rest was seen as a time of remembering God, that we are human, that we are made by God, and our capacity, our ability to rest, our need to rest, is rooted in God. Rest is to remember God, to sing to God, to play on the harp to God, to be thankful that we bear fruit as children of God, as our psalm suggests. Sabbath is a practice which we, all the industrious folk of the Protestant work ethic, have completely lost sight of. The prosperity gospel is also to blame, with its emphasis on accomplishment and wealth as evidence of God's blessing. Now, ironically, it is the Puritans, our spiritual ancestors here in the congregational tradition, who planted the seeds for this notion of a work ethic, and were the very same ones who also shaped the colonial and American practices of Sabbath keeping. In England and New England, Puritans reclaimed this idea of Sabbath for Christians, making it a hallmark of their families and communities. Sundays as a day set apart, wherein the focus would be on worship, reading scripture, meditating, prayer, being with family, resting, relaxing, laughing. The expectation was that one would do as little work as possible, and so Saturday before you would do some extra chores and prepare food so that on Sunday you did not have to make a bed or wash a utensil. Now, while Sabbath observance was the norm in America until the Civil War, in New England in particular, it was exemplified. Laws known as blue laws upheld and safeguarded these practices by prohibiting things like hunting or wearing lacy shirt sleeves. Well, anyway, lest you be tempted to blame Sabbath erosion on soccer, that great modern foil for all of the evils of culture, Sabbath practice actually eroded long before soccer was a big thing. Litigation in the 19th and early 20th century noted rightly that many of these blue laws were in conflict with our First Amendment, prohibiting laws respecting the establishment of religion. Culture culturally, church has been losing claim on people's lives for many years, even as concomitantly Sunday morning enjoyments such as kayaking, skiing, reading the paper, gardening, brunch making and eating, bike riding, and golf have all become more and more a part of our daily habits and practices. And you can't do them during the week, so Sunday morning. I have a hard time judging all those recreational practices as bad, for indeed many of them are very good for human rest and recreation. Still, it is helpful to remember that the Bible proscribes rest, and we are told to rest for these reasons. First, we are told to rest because, as Renee noted, it helps us to follow God's own pattern on creation, that work of 6 days with a seventh day of resting. The second reason we are told to rest is because Sabbath is the tremendous privilege of a people who have been freed from slavery. Sabbath reminds us that we are not mere producers or laborers or cogs in the engines of our economy. Rather, we are God's, and we are free. Sabbath making is the ultimate expression of our human freedom. Now, there is no question, empirical evidence backs this up, that rest is good for us. Everything from good sleep habits to napping to regular days off to taking ample vacation, they all are associated with better health outcomes, better social connections, better psychological outcomes, more joy, more creativity, and ironically, more productivity. So this is always what makes me laugh, is that all the studies talk about how you should get more rest because it makes you a better employee. That wasn't really the point, was it? We're not supposed to rest in order to become better producers. We're supposed to rest so that we can be God's. The biblical notions of Sabbath might reconnect us to those most effective and most helpful forms of Sabbath making. If we are to remember that rest is to connect us to God's creativity, we should eschew the temptations to catch up on housework or a few of those tasks from the week's work that we want to get a jump start on. If we remember that the Sabbath is to disconnect us from the machinery of industry and of the economy, then Sabbath is not to be a time to be productive or for consuming or for shopping. Those are all things we should avoid in order to truly honor some Sabbath space in our life. So what should we do? We should nourish the soul and cultivate a healthy sense of the holy in our lives. And how do we do that? Well, curiously, the article that I read about burnout suggested that the practices that church has provided for centuries are precisely some of the best ones for avoiding burnout. Community connection, prayer or meditation, and cultivating a sense of wonder. The article notes that people nowadays actually have commodified the practices of church. You can pay for a meditation class, a wonder retreat, or an event to cultivate community. Well, don't bother, just hie thee to church instead, and you'll get it here. So how do these church practices enhance rest? Well, community connections with not just the few people who we like and are our friends, but the broader community help to extend our capacity to love and, most importantly, mitigate against that enervating cynicism that develops when we have community that only mirrors who we are. Community teaches us to love as God does, reminds us that we are loved even when we are least lovable. In other words, community helps us to rest at ease in this wider fabric of love. Practices of prayer, meditation, and centering prayer enable the mind to rest, quieting that endless hamster wheel of thought and letting instead the soft breezes of thinking, of mind wandering to enter in. Creative and recreative forces find space and joy. Imagination comes to play when we are able to offer ourselves to forms of quiet prayer and meditation. Worship is good for rest. Praise and wonder enable us to stop the endless egotism and self-seeking that draw us into sinfulness. Instead, we lose ourselves in the marvel of the created order, of the beauty of God's majesty and nature, how lovely it is, the blessings of grace, the miracle of life. Losing ourselves thus, we re-find ourselves rightly, not in the striving self, but in the self that is peaceful, at ease, and capable of loving kindness. Now, I know this sermon is very much a preaching to the choir exercise. You who are here, no doubt, already engage in some of these practices, as true of those of you who are watching by our live stream. Still, you can and should, I can and should, engage these practices more intentionally and regularly. Rest from a holy point of view is certainly not binge watching Netflix or paying bills you didn't get to. Rest is about placing yourself back into this economy of God, where each person is made in God's image, companionable and worthy of our respect, where praise of God expands our spirits and humbly locates each one of us where we are loved and precious and free and free. I'll give the Puritan Thomas Watson, he's a 17th century voice, the last words for us today. This is what he wrote about Sabbath. The Sabbath day is for our interest. It promotes holiness in us. The busyness of weekdays makes us forgetful of God and of our souls. The Sabbath brings God back to our remembrance. When the falling dust of the world has clogged the wheels of our affection that they can scarce move towards God, the Sabbath comes and oils the wheels of our affections, and they move swiftly on. God has appointed the Sabbath for this end, and on this day the thoughts rise to heaven, the tongue speaks of God, the eyes drop tears, the soul brims with love. The heart, which all week was frozen on the Sabbath, melts with the word. The Sabbath is a friend to religion. It files off the rust of our graces. It is a spiritual jubilee wherein the soul is set to converse with its maker. God made this day on purpose to raise the heart to heaven.